The Durian Heat, bringing big ideas and critical opinions in Southeast Asia.
All that issues that you mentioned, the root cause of it, do you think it's cultural side in Malaysia, or it's a stereotyping that's already crafted in the society that people still do have that kind of mindset when they look at women?
Yes. First of all, I think this is not only in Malaysia. So it's not a very Malaysian situation. I think it's a world thing. And that's why we promote gender responsiveness in decision makings, in governance, gender analysis, which we call. These are all important because unless and until we address our structural issues, because these are all structural, what we have inherited and what we have experienced actually will be our point of reference for us to do what we're going to do next. Whenever you're going to do another action, you will we are all humans, we always look for a point of reference. So that's where you move forward. But unfortunately, our points of reference sadly promotes to some point gender inequalities, or those points of reference that are more gender unequal are those that's been promoted, so it's not all our inheritance are gender unequal, promotes gender inequality, but what is being promoted promotes that. So we need to address all these things. And like I said, one important thing is how our policies have been crafted. That is very important. How our development plans have been crafted, how much gender analysis that the government undertake to do all our Malaysia plans. It's encouraging to see our 11th Malaysia plan, which we are going to roll out. It's encouraging to see that we are focusing on elements of inclusivity, on women's participation, addressing disparity issue. It's enlightening, I would say. But then at the end of the day, they always say the proof is in the pudding. So it's a question of implementation. Now when we go to that issue of implementation, that's where understanding what gender means is very important. Having mechanisms that are gender responsive is very important. Whether it is whether it's the whole project management kind of issue of identification of your stakeholders or your clientele, how your budget has been processed, how your monitoring has been taken, what kind of indicators are you looking at, right up to your reporting. So I think all of this requires commitment if we really, really feel that the Agenda 2030 is about inclusivity. If we really, really believe our 11th Malaysia plan promotes unity and inclusivity and for our nation building. So we actually do need. I recently went for this meeting, and sadly at that meeting there's one guy, he came up to me and he was saying like, I don't understand why you keep pushing the gender issue. Do you know that we are very gender neutral?
I mean, in Malaysia.
That's what his opinion was. And I don't think that it's just him alone, but sometimes you go for meetings and you get this kind of comments, oh, we are very gender neutral, we don't discriminate based on gender. But then you have to understand that gender neutral policy, especially macro policy, when it's implemented within this present development mindset, this paradigm, actually in reality reinforces gender biasness. Simply because our structure is already a biased structure. So how can you expect anyone, whether it's a woman or someone from the marginalized community or most vulnerable communities, how can they compete when you don't have mechanism to allow them to bridge that gap? You cannot assume that just because I'm not gender neutral, it's an okay implementation. So these are things that needs careful reflection, I would say, and sometimes when you go for meetings like this is where you find that knowledge needs to be deepened. You do needs to still work on gender awareness, and like I say, sometimes it's quite frustrating because you seem to be doing this tango or cha-cha of one step forward, two step back, or and it's going on forever.
Right.
And the only point when you look at this is that the people that are suffering are those who are most vulnerable. They are most vulnerable because of their race, of their ethnicity, of their sexuality. Those are things that we really, really need to address if we want to be inclusive. But unless we are able to actually come to the table and speak about this issue, we are not going to achieve this dream of inclusivity. It's just a dream.
That's very true. I think you gave another insight to look at the structure and perhaps the inclusiveness when it comes to gender. How have the issues of this inequality been dealt when you compare urban and also rural areas? Because we talked about social status and it'll be definitely different, urban areas and rural areas.
Yes. I think that we need to demystify, first of all, that just because you're urban doesn't mean you're well off. And just because you're rural, you are more vulnerable. I think that the location or the locality and the kind of, I would say, productive activities and which is undertaken and in this area creates their own set of circumstances. So it has to be dealt based on that. It's not as simple as clustering of urban and rural.
Just a general image of those two.
Yeah,
okay.
Because there are different sets of issues. And especially, when you're looking at from an environmental point of view, like, since I'm coming from the environmental background, those things are very, very critical. And you find that all these nuances impacts how we respond, how we cope, and these are things that's very significant, because how we cope with an environmental event and now all this, how we develop, how we build our cities, how we develop our rural areas. This create a lot of environmental impacts. They are all different, and more importantly, they are all interlinked. So first of all, recognize the interlinkages. Second, understand the nuances, and third, we need to find a way forward if we really need to achieve all these dreams that we have, whether nationally or globally, because unless, and like I said before, unless you adopt a mechanism that recognizes gender equality, recognizes the importance of doing gender, you will find that your actions may not reach the right target. Or may not have the kind of impact you wish for it to create. So these are very important. If you look at, for example, when we are talking about whether it's urban or rural, our trade policies greatly impacts how women work. Actually, now we have signed the TPPs. Whatever, it doesn't matter. Whatever bilateral agreements that we sign. All those policies impact on our communities, and all those policies also impact on our economic growth. We may think that it will lead to a specific economic growth, but sometimes it may not, and there are many studies. For example, there is a study about looking at a 2010 study that surveyed about 56 developing countries, and found that 2/3 while they were responding to the 2008 economic crisis, cut budgets that impact significantly on gender equality. And because this budget are cut in terms of education, in terms of healthcare, in terms of food subsidies, and all these support mechanisms actually supported women's empowerment, so to speak. You know, and we find that many women are the first to be laid off, whether it's in Latin America or whether it's in Asia. They are the first to be laid off because their work is so insecure. You know, this whole issue of labor force participation, women are generally seen to be the first ones to be laid off. So we must identify and eliminate all this gender biasness within our policy making. And if we want to achieve our commitments, whether it's our climate commitments or your SDG commitments, doesn't matter which is the commitments, but if we really feel that we can achieve those commitments and we believe in those commitments, then we must identify where are the gender biasness and address those.
You're now listening to Durian ASEAN, the voice of discovery and sharing.